The clatter of dishes, the chatter of patrons, and the sizzle of breakfast orders filled the busy diner. Among the well-organized pandemonium in the kitchen was Harper, a young waitress with a good heart and a pleasant smile who had a flair for bringing joy to even the most grumpy regulars and taking delight in giving each client her all. Yet this. Harper noticed a slight change in the morning as she brought a platter of hot pancakes by the window. Sitting close to the curb, this golden retriever dog had filthy fur. His ribs were just barely visible through his coat, and his large. Harper paused, her heart breaking, as beseeching eyes searched the passers-by for food or even a morsel of attention. For the small animal, the puppy simply sat quietly without barking or pleading. He smelt the air and let out a faint whine while he gazed longingly at the plates of food being carried inside. Sadly, Harper muttered to herself as her fingers clenched around the tray, knowing that stray dogs weren't unusual in the region, but something about this puppy resonated deeply with her. He appeared desolate but hopeful. Harper put the dish down and asked her manager, Mr. Connor, "Do you think I could not?" He interrupted abruptly, just barely. Looking up at his clipboard, Harper bit her lip and said, "Don't even consider it, Harper. We're not feeding strays." She was filled with frustration because the diner threw away food every day. What harm could one meal do? A few moments later, Harper decided as she walked by the counter and picked up a plate of bacon, bread, and scrambled eggs that a customer had left uneaten. She wrapped it. The dog shivered as she got close, but she didn't flee, so she hastily added a little cup of water and left. Harper, the small guy, stooping down, murmured softly, "Are you hungry? This is for you." The golden retriever cocked his head, uncertain but intrigued, and sniffed slowly. Harper lovingly stroked his head, while she ate the food with a hunger that shattered Harper's heart. Harper was unaware that her act of goodwill had been seen, and that her life was about to change. But you're not alone anymore. Harper stayed outside the cafe for a little while longer, watching the golden retriever devour the meal, and it changed her life forever. She couldn't help but grin as she saw the first glimmer of joy in the small creature, his tail waving softly. "You were," she whispered, "starving, huh? Poor thing," and reached out to gently scratch. The dog stopped behind his ear and gazed up at her with soulful gratitude. Harper the voice yelled at her, with eyes that conveyed tales of loneliness and adversity. With a sudden jerk, she spun around to discover her manager, Mr. Connor, standing in the doorway with his. "What are you doing?" he yelled, his arms crossed and his face twisted in disapproval. Harper got up and brushed her hands against her apron as his voice was loud enough to attract attention from within the diner. "He interrupted you as you were feeding a stray dog, and I marched closer." Harper's cheeks, "I told you not to do that. How many times do I need to remind you that this is a company and not a charity?" She looked across to the customers who were now looking through the glass, flushed with shame. "Mr. Connor," they were whispering to each other that it was only a plate of leftover food, protested while attempting to maintain composure. "We discard a lot of things every day, and Mr. Connor, this little guy obviously needed it." Shook his head, his face icy, and wondered what would happen when he returned the following day. "And there will be strays throughout the next day, which is detrimental to company. If the health inspector notices this, we could." Harper looked at the dog, who was now sitting gently with his ears drooping as though he could, and her heart fell. "Sense the strain, but Harper, you're fired." Connor snapped, but no buts. She stated in shock that she was feeding a dog when the words "collect your things and go" struck her like a punch to the gut. "Yes." Connor turned on his heel and went back inside for defying my rules and making this place seem bad. And Harper stood still, her mind racing. "And don't let me catch you here again." Customers gazed at her through the window. Some were empathetic, while others were unconcerned and fired her right away. Pricked her eyes, but instead of letting them drop, she lowered herself back down. Beside the puppy, she forced a grin for his sake, whispering, "It's okay, buddy. It's not your fault." That Harper ran her fingers around the golden retriever's body as it leaned in to comfort her. "What should I do now?" she whispered, mostly to herself. "I have bills. Not having a job to rely on and having to pay rent that is due at the end of the month." The puppy licked her palm in a gesture of kindness that seemed so insignificant but so important. "Harper, He seemed to be attempting to reassure her despite everything by gently wagging his tail. Felt a glimmer of hope, as though the small puppy was reassuring her that all will work out in the end. Then, the gentle murmur. She noticed a sleek black SUV pulling up in front of the diner, its engine purring as it approached. Harper scowled when it stopped, protecting her eyes from the afternoon sun's glare through the driver's side door. Opened, and a tall guy wearing a fitted suit emerged, his shiny shoes clicking on the sidewalk. The man said, "Excuse me, miss," in a composed and commanding tone as he walked up. "Are you the one who fed this dog, Harper?" Harper straightened the puppy that was snuggling on her leg for comfort. Paused, unsure how to react. "Yes, I am," she said, carefully explaining why the man. His piercing eyes shifted to the dog at her feet, and then, greatly to her astonishment, he regarded her for a while before softening. Harper blinked and said, "You have this little dog," which made me grin. "One of my favorite people has been missing for days." The puppy gazed up at the man, tilting his head as though attempting to identify him. And then, to Harper's surprise, the man knelt and extended his hand. He murmured softly, "Here, boy," and the golden retriever paused, looking between. He tentatively went nearer, sniffing the man's hand before nuzzling Harper, who seemed to be divided between the two. The man's smile softly expanded. "There you are," he whispered, scratching behind him. The man stood there, saying, "I've been so worried about you," that Harper couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. "Scout is my daughter's best dog. He's not mine." Yet he's up shaking his head. Buddy, who's been devastated ever since he vanished. He turned to Harper, and his face abruptly became serious. "You have." Harper blinked with surprise, "and I'm just relieved that he's aware of how much this means to us." "Safe." The man took a sleek leather wallet from his pocket. He handed her a business card and said, "I'd like to offer you something in return. Come by." He had done something amazing today. Harper glanced at the card, unable to speak, "But I believe I have an opportunity you'll be interested in at this address tomorrow, Am." I'm not sure what to do, because the address was for a well-known local charity that she had only ever heard about on the news. "Yes," the man answered with a knowing smile. "Good people deserve," as she stammered. Fortunately, he guided Scout to the SUV and unlocked the golden door. Retriever stopped and gave Harper another glance with those same soulful eyes before waving goodbye and taking care of her. "You," the puppy, once made a joyful, appreciative yelp as though to guarantee that this. Harper stayed there for a long time, but it wasn't actually goodbye as the SUV pulled away. Whether the business card she was holding had fired or not, she couldn't get rid of the sensation that something amazing had just started. Harper's heart thumping in her chest as she stood in front of the address on the business card the following morning. Chest as she glanced up at the sleek, contemporary structure with the words Evergreen Animal Rescue Foundation written on the door. A name she knew right away. It was one of the city's most well-known groups for saving and, led by the powerful Dusan family, and focused on animal rehabilitation. "Am I truly meant to be here?" Harper said to herself as she clenched the card, recalling yesterday. The guy, the dog, the unexpected offer. It felt unreal. She inhaled deeply, summoned her confidence, and entered the spotless, well-lit reception area. A kind receptionist grinned and said, "Good morning. May I be of assistance to you?" as pictures of Rescue 6 animals lined the walls. "Yes, I'm Harper." And before she could finish, someone called to welcome me here. Harper turned to see that the man from yesterday was now dressed. He came up with a kind grin and said, "I'm glad you made it," in a more relaxed but authoritative manner. The man said, "Come with me," with a slight thank you. I wasn't sure what to expect. I should give you a formal introduction. My name is Andrew Dawson, and this foundation is controlled by my family. I'm pointing to a corridor. Harper followed him after you restored a small girl's happiness yesterday by saving more than just a puppy. As her curiosity grows, she realizes how much the Golden Retriever Scout means to her. Andrew nodded, his face softening as he acknowledged my daughter Lily's struggles. Scout is more than just a pet since her mother passed away last year. He was her solace and greatest friend when he ran away. We looked everywhere after Lily was afraid during a rainstorm because she hadn't slept well in days. But last night, Harper's heart grew when I saw Scout smile for the first time in weeks when we brought her home. The idea that, "I'm so happy Scout is back where he belongs," Andrew, that her simple act of compassion had such an overwhelming impact, paused in front of a wide window that overlooked a vast play area with Harper humans and happy, bouncy dogs. Most people would have disregarded A.R. Stray, but you intervened when no one else did, and he turned to face her. I would want to offer you a position at Evergreen Harper Frosted because the foundation could use someone with your kind of heart. Indeed, Andrew acknowledged that we rescue, rehabilitate, and find loving homes for animals. Houses is challenging, but it's worthwhile, and I believe that with your compassion, you'd. Harper was unable to speak since the past 24 hours had felt like I don't get why Whirlwind was fired for feeding a stray dog one day and now receiving an opportunity to work at a reputable animal shelter. Know what to say, she acknowledged. Yes, Andrew remarked, grinning. You'll begin. Harper hesitated, her mind racing at the prospect of working part-time. And if it works out, we'll change it to full-time. Her heart pounded with excitement at the prospect of working with animals and being a part of something greater. Yes, she murmured at last. She smiled, and I would have loved it if Andrew had clapped his hands together. Okay, let me give you a little overview. Over the course of the following several hours, Harper was introduced. Andrew introduced her to the field of animal rescue by showing her the various areas of the facility, including the hospital wing the adoption center, where families came to meet their new furry companions, provided medical care for injured animals. Dogs like Scout can run freely in this outdoor play area. Harper remarked that it's amazing to see a pack of puppies joyously tumble around. Andrew acknowledged that his voice is proud, but there are a lot of obstacles in the way. It takes time, patience, and a lot of patience to help animals that are afraid, mistreated, or abandoned. A great deal of love to restore their trust. Harper gazed out at the animals, remembering Scout's tired. The day before, she whispered softly, I know you, with soulful eyes. As the day came to an end, Harper was assisting in cleaning out one of the kennels. She turned to find a sloppy little terrier mix peering up at her tail when she felt a tug on her pant leg. She crooked down a scratch behind his ears while wagging angrily and laughing. Tucker, a volunteer who has been here for a while, commented, Aren't you adorable? He's a beautiful little man, but, Harper reportedly said, he's not nervous around people anymore. As Tucker kissed her fingers, indicating that she felt a bond, was immediate and organic. And that night, for the first time in weeks, she experienced a glimmer of happiness as Harper. After leaving the foundation, she discovered that she was mentally reliving the events of the previous day. Having been humiliated by her dismissal and uncertain about her future, she was walking home today with a newfound sense of purpose and a job that. She was already feeling correct when her phone buzzed, jolting her out of her reverie. Thank you for looking after Scout. My dad thinks you're working at the rescue. This message is from an unknown phone. Now, I simply wanted to say that you're great. Lily Harper grinned while reading. The text said that a single act of kindness had started a series of events that she could not have foreseen, including maybe losing her job. It wasn't the worst thing that could have happened, she whispered, feeling lighter than she had in a long time. She could already hear the soft yips and barks of dogs, which seemed to be calling her back to her true home. Harper soon found joy in the Evergreen Animal Rescue Foundation. Every morning she arrived early and was welcomed by the sound of dogs barking and the soft murmur of caregivers beginning their daily tasks. Every day, the bond with the animals deepened, particularly with Tucker, the unkempt terrier mix who had immediately won a place in her heart. Nevertheless, the foundation staff was a team, not simply the dogs. Harper had not felt this sense of belonging in a long time, but Andrew had been correct this time. Harper was passionate, caring, and supportive. Work was challenging, but it had purpose one day a week or two in her new job. Tucker was pulling on a frayed rope toy while Harper was seated on the play area floor, laughing, when Andrew approached her thoughtfully and asked, How may I speak with you for a moment? She looked up, her smile waning. Since he seemed so serious, Andrew gestured for her to follow him inside, which led her to his. Pictures of successful adoptions and tales of rehabilitated animals adorn the office walls. Each image serves as evidence of the foundation's efforts. Andrew sat behind his desk and motioned for Harper to sit down. I want to check in on you, he said in a kind tone. You've been doing amazing work here, Harper. Your bond with the animals is unique." Harper's face lit up with joy. "Thank you. I've never felt more at home," Andrew said with a small smile, but he hesitated first. "Going on, I have to tell you about your former boss Harper, who froze Mr. Grady." Andrew moved forward, his voice trailing off a little, "and told me that you were fired for what transpired at the diner." Harper's confused blinks may not have been caused by the meal you gave her. "But what do you mean?" "Someone anonymously reported Mr. Grady to animal control," Andrew groaned. "It appears that he has been mistreating strays that walk too close or remain around his diner for a few months. The report stated that he had been forcefully scaring them away for food, or worse." Harper felt her stomach fall. "You claim that Hune has been causing them pain." Andrew grimly nodded in agreement with the investigation. "Didn't go very far at the time because to a lack of sufficient evidence. But I became interested in your narrative and began looking into it. It appears that Mr. Grady's last straw was you feeding Scout. Harper, your generosity threatened the way he handled the problem because he didn't want the dog staying around his diner. She had anticipated that Mr. Grady may be aloof, but to believe he would go. She was rendered speechless by the cruelty to animals, and she whispered, 'He dismissed me because I did the right thing by being kind to a dog, which is precisely why we need people like you,' Harper." Andrew stated strongly. "I recognize this after witnessing your concern for Scout." Harper's head raced with the idea of Mr. Harper, because you weren't someone who would ignore cruel. Grady's abuse of other stray animals who were defenseless and abandoned led to her. "Blood boil. Is there anything we can do?" she questioned, her voice trembling resolutely. Andrew gave her a little smile as he had been waiting for her to inquire, but in reality, he had been working on a collaboration with animal control to deal with situations like this. But in order to act, Harper relies on further proof. "Tell me what I can do to help." Harper that evening, as her eyes narrow. Reminiscences of her time in the diner brought back recollections of her stray cat, which she couldn't stop thinking about. At the time, she hadn't seen them lurking in the alley the way Grady would yell and use a broom to shoo them away. She gave a lot of thought, but now that everything made sense, her resolve solidified as she went. Tucker was cheerfully jogging along with her on a leash when she got home. Andrew had given her permission to temporarily foster him. She whispered to Tucker, scratching behind him, "You're coming with me tomorrow." The arrangement already felt permanent. Harper came the following morning, and we're going to make sure that no other animal has to suffer because of his ears. She remained hidden across the street, watching as Grady yelled commands at the diner as the early shift started. When she saw a tiny figure fleeing behind a dumpster in the alley, his staff's heart began to race. Harper's gut twisted as she saw the skinny, filthy kitten obviously looking for scraps. Grady went outside, saw the kitten, and snatched up a broom. "Get out of here," he yelled, swinging the broom violently. Harper tightened her hands as the kitten hissed and ran off, vanishing into a small space between buildings. Harper murmured, "That's enough," and took out her phone to record the incident on film throughout the course of the following few days. With the assistance of some evergreen volunteers, she proceeded to collect evidence and recorded Grady's behavior toward stray animals by shouting, threatening, and even trying to frighten them away with. Andrew watched the video of the water hoses at the foundation, and this is more than. He continued, his voice tight with rage, enough to reopen the investigation. "We'll cooperate with animal control to put an end to." Harper nodded in agreement, her heart pounding. It's time he was held responsible as she. Harper experienced a range of feelings as she sat with Tucker that evening, including pride in her deeds, hope, and rage at the unfair justice. For the first time, she understood that her dismissal from the diner had not been a setback, but rather the beginning of something far larger, and she would not let up until all stray animals, including Scout and Tucker, were. Harper didn't get much sleep that night because of the pictures of Mr. Grady swinging his. It was infuriating to realize that using a broom and yelling at defenseless creatures was repeated in her mind like a broken record. For so long, he had been acting cruelly right in front of her, and no one had stopped him, but now that things were. The next morning, however, Mahara appeared at the Evergreen Animal Rescue Foundation with a goal. Andrew was already at his office, sorting through a fresh resolve that was burning in her chest. Harper knocked on the open door as he was working on paperwork and drinking coffee. "Good morning," she greeted steadily. However, Andrew looked up with purpose, grinning slightly. "Good morning, Harper. You look." Harper entered and put her bags on. "And it appears that you are on a mission today." Andrew leaned back in his chair and studied her for a time, wondering what to do about Grady. "Animal control is examining the intriguing footage you gathered, but we must be ready for situations like this one. Time, and Grady isn't the kind to go lightly." Harper scowled. "So what do we do?" Andrew nodded in agreement, saying, "We can't let more animals suffer while the process drags on." "You're correct. We can increase our outreach until animal control completes their task. It's likely that animals are wandering into the surroundings since Grady is forcing them out of his diner. Thus we need to find them, bring them here, and ensure their safety." Harper's shoulders loosened a little. "I can assist." "I knew you would." Andrew smiled. "I'll assemble a group of volunteers and begin canvassing the region this afternoon." Harper paused as she heard the words, "You'll take the lead." "Why not Andrew take the lead?" "Harper, you've shown time and time again that you care and that the animals trust you. That's what counts." After a brief moment of hesitation, he nodded. "Okay, I'll do it that afternoon." Armed with cartons, blankets, and cries, Harper and a small group of evergreen volunteers ventured inside. It was a cool fall day in the area around the diner, and Harper couldn't help but observe how peaceful the Tucker jogged joyfully by her side, and the streets were likened to the busy diner she had previously named her workplace. Harper had insisted on taking him with her, not only for companionship, but also because she trusted his. The first hour was slow, but he was a resilient dog who had probably had a life similar to the strays they were searching for. Harper walked around any questionable corners where a hungry animal might hide, looked behind bins, and inspected alleyways. Bowls of food were left behind, but a few cats fled before the volunteers could approach. Harper saw something close to a collapsing brick wall behind an abandoned building, intending to entice them back later. She noticed a slight movement, just a flicker, but it was enough to get her to stop. Squatting quietly and asking Tucker, "Do you see that, buddy?" Tucker sniffed the air. Harper came forward, his tail wagging warily, and a tiny tremble was concealed beneath the plants and rubble. Puppy's ribs were apparent through its thin coat, and its fur was matted and filthy. Harper put Tucker's leash down and muttered, "Oh, sweetheart," with a broken heart. He remained motionless and slowly extended her hand, saying, "It's okay. Now that you're secure." The puppy trembled, its large, terrified eyes meeting hers. Harper didn't approach. Instead, she waited, speaking quietly and reassuring you that I won't harm you, and that Tucker is present as well, as if on cue. Tucker was lying on the ground, wagging his chin while resting it on his paws. Tailed gently, the tiny puppy gave him an inquisitive but fearful glance after a few. Harper pushed you to take a cautious step forward, and that's all it needed. Well, she took a slice of soft bread from her bag, which she had brought specifically for this purpose. With a little cry, the puppy smelled the air, attracted by the food, and eventually took the bread from Harper's hand. "There we go." Harper softly reached out and rubbed her hand as a smile spread across her face. She gingerly picked up the puppy and held it against her as she felt its twitching muscles begin to calm. The puppy's face was buried in her sweater, too feeble to fight. "You're safe." At this point, she whispered, "I promise that Harper and her team will have saved." The veterinarian looked at the trembling puppy she had discovered back at the foundation, 2 cats, and 3 stray animals. Harper sat up late into the night, tending to their wounds and making sure they were warm and fed. Tucker laid next to the puppy's crate, keeping watch over it while it slept soundly for the first time in an unknown amount of time. Andrew walked up to them both in silence, grinning proudly. "Well done today." Harper looked up and brushed her hair back. "That feels good." "Harper, you save lives," she said. "I'm doing what I should be doing," to which Andrew retorted, "You are." Harper nodded as a soft hand rested on her shoulder, saying, "This is just the beginning." Although Mr. Grady was still out there, her heart was heavy, and until the inquiry stopped him, there would be more creatures like to those they had rescued today. But for the moment, Harper grinned as she gazed at the sleeping dog. Harper immersed herself in her job at the Evergreen during the next several days after she whispered, "We'll save them all. The pups, Kittens and strays that the Animal Rescue Foundation had rescued during their initial search started to get better. The trembling puppies' feeble bodies reacting to warmth, nourishment, and care. Scout, whom Harper had discovered among the weeds, soon became the focus of her. He was a little bashful and still apprehensive around loud noises, but he would wag his tail whenever Harper came closer to regaining human trust. But as Harper got to know Scout and the other animals, the news of Mr. Grady's cruel treatment of animals had started to circulate, and his ghost was more present than ever. Despite the fact that no formal action was taken against him, the community's whispers were sufficient to put the diner. Customers decreased beneath a shroud of suspicion, and Grady's annoyance was growing unavoidable. In the afternoon, Harper and Andrew were sitting in his office going over adoption forms when Andrew's phone rang. Scooped it up, and almost instantly his face tightened. Evergreen Foundation. Harper's gut froze when Andrew said, "Yes, this is our organization." "What do you mean by trespassing?" "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, sinking as she heard the loud, snarling voice on the other end of the line. Andrew firmly responded, "We operate within the law and any footage," in reference to Mr. Grady. Harper could almost picture Grady's face turning red with rage as the voice interrupted him and grew louder. "If you believe," Stone Andrew straightened in his chair with clenched eyelids and cold eyes. "Good day, Mr. Grady. I think you should bring up your allegation with animal control." He slammed the phone down and let out a sharp breath, squeezing the bridge of his nose. Harper had already inquired what he had said. Knowing the response, Andrew's voice was quiet and low, but behind the surface, his annoyance was simmering as Grady accused us of invading his land and disrupting his business. "He claims we've been urging clients to stay away from his." Harper scowled. "That's absurd that we haven't mentioned him to anyone." Knowing that he's being watched, he is lashing out. Andrew responded, but his anger is now more than just words. Harper sat back and chewed her lower lip. "So what do you do?" "That makes him unpredictable. We continue our work, but we're cautious since we don't want to give up." Andrew stared at her calmly and measuredly. Harper nodded, "But he's depending on us losing our composure." "Grady, any ammunition?" She felt a glimmer of fear, but Grady wasn't just snapping. He was getting worse later that night as Harper. Tucker waved his hand as Andrew caught up to her at the shelter's front door as she concluded her shift and got ready to go home. Harper Andrew's tone as he followed her to get ready for their evening stroll. Harper blinked. "I've made arrangements for security cameras to be installed around the foundation tomorrow, which is quieter than usual." "I'm shocked that you believe it's essential, Andrew. I don't want to take any chances." Retorted that Grady's rage will only worsen and that I don't want him to come near this location because of what you did. "Great job, Harper. I just want to make sure you're okay." The comments really resonated with Harper, and no one had ever looked out for her in that way before. She gave a slight smile and said, "Thanks, Andrew. I'll be careful." He nodded and then looked. Harper strolled home through Tucker, who was a good watchdog since he kept Tucker close and barked happily at his side. She couldn't get rid of the impression that she was being watched as the streets grew darker. Every shadow appeared longer and every sound more acute. When they eventually arrived at her tiny apartment, Tucker marched protectively next to her, his ears alert and pricked up. Tucker jumped up next to Harper as she collapsed onto the couch after double-checking the locks on her windows and doors. He put his head on her lap as though he could sense her discomfort. But Harper, "It's okay," said, rubbing his ears. "We're fine," but she was unable to forget the sound of Mr. Grady's irate, spiteful, and distant voice over the phone. Harper came to the shelter early the following morning, hoping to divert attention herself by interacting with Scout and the other animals. Her eyes grew wide as she entered the front doors. Shock. The door was tarnished with thick black spray paint streaks, and the shelter's walls had been defaced. As the words "Leave our town alone" slid across the brick, Harper's hands trembled and her heart fell. Scrambled to get her phone to call Andrew, and a few minutes later he showed up with many volunteers, all of them looking in. Andrew clenched his fists in shock at the graffiti, thinking it must be Grady or someone related to him. Harper. Her stomach turned as she nodded numbly. "What should we do now, Andrew?" "Let's clean everything up," said forcefully. "This is what happens when you fight for something that matters. And we don't let this stop us, Harper." When Harper started to crack her voice, Andrew gently interrupted her. but the animals will fight back. Harper inhaled deeply. The animals need us. They need you. And we're not going to let anyone scare us away. As Andrew's remarks weighed heavily on her, she turned to face the terrified animals in the shelter, who relied on them for affection, and Protection Scout was relying on Tucker too. Harper nodded and Leighton tidied up as the team started, relying on her with renewed resolve. Harper noticed Scout observing her through the window of his kennel while she was cleaning the graffiti off. Harper whispered to him, more to herself than he heard, "We're not giving up," as her tiny tail wagged slightly. Harper and the team put forth a lot of effort over the course of the following week to fix the walls were cleared of graffiti, the security cameras were installed, and the shelter's image was both literally and figuratively installed, and more volunteers joined the effort to assist with the animals' care. Everyone was shaken by the incident, but it additionally caused a surge of community support. Individuals who were aware of the vandalism started presenting local news stations with food blanket and supply contributions, highlighted the story, bringing attention to the shelter's purpose and the difficulties they encountered. It appears that we're getting across to people. Andrew mentioned that one afternoon while standing with Harper sorting donations. It can take. Harper gave a small smile, but her thoughts were elsewhere, as if there was a crisis to wake people up. Since the incident, she had been walking Tucker a bit closer and looking over her shoulder more frequently. She knew that Grady hadn't made another move, but she was worried about what he could do next. His stillness didn't indicate that he was finished. Rather, it was at one of these times when he was observing the puppy in Scout's kennel. Harper's phone buzzed with an unexpected message, so she nuzzled a new blanket. Anonymous number. "You are seriously misguided. Get out of here before it's too late." Before locking the phone, her pulse stopped a beat as she gazed at the screen with her thumb resting over the respond button. She inhaled deeply and looked down at Scout, who looked up at her with innocent brown eyes. "It's okay, Scout," she whispered. "We're safe here," even though her voice trembled a little. Later that night, Andrew summoned an emergency team. Harper and other volunteers sat in a circle of chairs to discuss the growing tension and Harper's nerves. Frayed while she waited for him to tell everyone that everything was okay, Andrew started off in a calm but serious tone that I won't sugarcoat. "We've all heard the whispers about Grady, and some people don't appreciate what we're doing here, making waves. And the way he treats animals is his method of retaliating, attempting to frighten us away, but we haven't done anything incorrectly," one of the volunteers said, her irritation clear in her voice, "which is precisely why we are unable to." Andrew adamantly stated that if we give up now, he will be able to win the animal scout Tucker and all of them. Harper nodded, resolute, and said, "This shelter is their lifeline." Her gaze softened as she inquired calmly, "What about the threats?" "We're reporting everything to the police, Harper," he said, turning to face her. "You're not alone in this if someone so much as." The comments were intended to reassure her, but Harper couldn't shake the feeling that if she steps foot close to you or the shelter, we'll take action. Grady was specifically trying to frighten her with the weight of the anon message, and she wondered if it was her fault for confronting him that day in the cafe. As the volunteers scattered after the meeting, Andrew came up. Harper put a kind hand on her shoulder and asked, "Are you okay?" Harper pushed A. Andrew whispered softly, "Smile, I'm fine, just a little rattled. But keep in mind, this Grady's rage isn't directed at you. Rather, it's a fear of what we stand for." Harper nodded in appreciation of the words, even though they didn't completely allay her fears, as he is aware that she is exposed. "Spend time with Tucker. You've been running." Andrew took the night off. "You're ragged here." She thought about protesting, but changed her mind. Andrew was correct. She needed some time to calm down. Harper took Tucker on a lengthy stroll around the peaceful streets of her neighborhood that evening after the sun had set. Tucker trotted joyfully beneath the horizon, where the dim glimmer of streetlights illuminated the walkways in a gentle yellow hue. Harper exclaimed out loud, "Maybe Andrew's right," as he strolled beside her, his tail wagging and his ears perked up. "Perhaps Grady is bluffing to frighten us behind Tucker's ears." Tucker responded by barking as though he agreed with. Harper gave a small laugh, the first sincere smile she had felt all day. She took a minute to appreciate Tucker's consoling presence, the cool night air, and the gentle rustle of leaves. However, Harper halted as they turned the corner back toward her and saw a dark automobile parked. She could see the dim glow of someone sitting in the driver's seat across the street, even though the engine was off. Started to beat, whispering, "Come on, Tucker." She gripped the leash tightly and accelerated her pace, her gaze flashing back. Harper could feel the weight of their stares following her as she crossed the street, but the figure remained motionless. Tucker barked once. She was standing attentive, as though her hands were shaking as she unlocked her apartment door. Seeing that she was uncomfortable, she murmured to her friend, dragging him through the door, and locked it after her. Peephole. She observed the vehicle for a few minutes before the engine roared to. Harper leaned against the door, her breath weak as life, and it drew away into the night. "It's okay," she muttered. Tucker sat next to her, laying his head, and she said more to herself than to everyone else. "It's okay. They're just trying to frighten me." Grady's threats were no longer idle words, as she caressed his fur on her knee while he watched her. And he wanted her to know it. But Harper was thinking about Scout and all the other animals as she stared down at Tucker, relying on her. A glimmer of rebellion appeared in her chest, and she whispered, "I swear to you, you won't win, Grady." That the next days were a haze of attentiveness and silent resistance. Harper refused to allow fear to control her behavior. Each morning, she arrived at the shelter prepared to. She pretended not to notice the strange cars that were there to take care of the animals and make sure everything went perfectly. Every now and again, Andrew drove carefully past the shelter or the ominous notes that appeared beneath the door, informed the police of everything, but they were powerless without specific evidence of Grady's involvement. Harper was playing with her shoelaces while standing next to Scout's golden retriever pups enclosure one afternoon when Harper's head jumped up as the voice surprised her. "I'm not a bleeding heart." Grady stood just inside. A ruthless grin twisted his lips as he entered the shelter, casting an ice shadow over the otherwise cozy and joyous space. Tucker snarled softly from his hackles as he laid close to Harper. Harper abruptly stood up and exclaimed, "Raised, you can't be in here." She then left Grady, disregarded her approaching, and gave the shelter a patronizing glance. "This crap is still open?" "I'm shocked." Harper shot back, but her heart was pounding. "You have no right to be upset. I thought you would have given up by now. We're doing great. Before I call the police, get out here." Grady's grin wavered, but his eyes, police officers, squinting with barely concealed rage, "Won't do anything you don't know." Harper murmured, her voice firm despite her clenching, "What you're up against, sweetheart. I know exactly what I'm up against." Grady's expression darkened as the bully, fearful of being revealed, clenched her fists. Harper questioned whether Tucker would strike out, but he remained guardedly in front of her, his growl gradually becoming louder. "Have it your way," mumbled Grady, sneering and backing away toward the door. "But don't claim I didn't warn you." Harper watched him go, and only after the door opened did the tension in her chest start to ease. She muttered, "Good boy," as she crouched behind him and massaged Tucker's head. Unaware of the exchange, "You're my brave boy, Scout, and your voice is shaking." A joyful bark that brought Harper's attention back to the instant she overcame her fear of Grady's intimidating methods. Harper and Andrew were growing bolder, but she wouldn't let him win that night. Discussed arrangements for the community's next fundraising event for the shelter while seated at a corner table in a little cafe. Had come together to show their support following the vandalism, and Andrew had proposed holding a rescue day event to raise. In order to raise money and awareness, we'll erect adoption booths outdoors and welcome families to see the animals. Andrew revealed that he was tapping his pen against a leaflet they were creating and that they might potentially collaborate with nearby companies to sponsor. Harper nodded, sensing a glimmer of hope. "I like that some of the animals care, because it will remind people that we're not leaving. Grady will find it more difficult to continue shoving us around." Andrew's face, the more people we include, became grave when discussing Grady. "Harper, I don't like what's going on with him. His appearance today, the increasing damage, and the threats are not encouraging." Harper scowled. "I know, but we can't." Andrew sighed. "You're brave, Harper. You're braver. If we give up now, all we've worked for will be for nothing. Then others. But I really don't want the sincerity in his voice to cause you any harm. startled her when she saw the worried shadows on Andrew's face for the first time. "I'll be all right," she assured. Andrew nodded, but he said softly, "As long as we're in this together, we'll figure it out." His worry persisted, and it became evident early on the morning of the rescue day incident. Volunteers had turned the shelter's tiny parking lot into a bustling festival complete with tents, banners, and stalls. Families started to come as they hurried to set up tables with adoption paperwork, pet supplies, and contribution jars. Youngsters squealing with joy upon seeing the creatures Harper toiled so hard to raise. Scout is currently addressing questions and presenting puppies to prospective adopters while pacing between booths. His lively manner and bright green bandana with the words, "Adopt me," sewn on it soon made him the day's main attraction. Everywhere Golden Fur Drew walked, a young mother kneeled next to Scout and cried, "Look at this little guy." Harper smiled as her daughter hugged him and giggled, saying, "We might just have to bring him home. He would make it fantastic." The happiness of the day was infectious, especially with your family. But Harper couldn't get rid of the thought that she sensed something was strange when she saw a man standing at the edge of the crowd, staring at her with his arms crossed. His baseball cap and sunglasses made it difficult to see his expression, but Harper's gut ached. Pulling him away, she whispered, "Andrew, do you see that guy by the fence?" Looked over and scowled. "Yes, Harper, and I don't recognize him." The man lingered as he whispered, "HEK has been observing me. Stay near the volunteers." Andrew firmly replied, "I'll keep an eye on him." Harper made herself concentrate on the event for a further 30 minutes before fading into the crowd. At the end of the day, she reminded herself that Grady and his threats would not destroy what they had created. Harper could never have imagined that the shelter would generate enough money to adopt 10 animals, including Scout. Harper gave Scout a tearful farewell hug and assured him that his new family would provide him with a life full of love and happiness. Her eyes were stung, but they were tears of happiness. "You'll be overjoyed." Watch Scout depart with his new family, Harper, whispering to the puppy as he licked her cheek, "Do you deserve this?" Regardless of the grade he attempted, he felt a renewed sense of purpose because the shelter was helping. But as the sun, Harper's heart fell when she saw a little envelope posted to the shelter's door as the volunteers started packing up. "You believe you've won, but it's not over." You tore it open and found a single note scrolling in rough handwriting. Harper's jaw clenched with resolve as she read the lines, but her hands shook. Grady's threats were increasing risk, but she didn't allow fear to stop her. The days after the rescue day event were bittersweet for Harper. Scout's adopted family had emailed her photos of the contented golden retriever, who was doing well in his new home, jogging around their yard. But she couldn't let the message that was put on the shelter door leave her head like a black cloud. Grady prevailed, but she was unable to ignore the fact that it was getting late. Evening, as Harper was going through adoption papers in the shelter's little office, Andrew gently tapped on the, "I thought you could use this," he replied, holding a cup of steaming tea on the doorframe. Harper smiled slightly and gave her the mug, saying, "Thank you." She returned a kind grin, leaned back in her chair, and sighed, "We should be." As a way to celebrate the event's success, Andrew dragged a chair over. Harper hesitated. Then she said, "Yeah, but you've got that look again, like something's eating at you." "I've decided to be honest. Everything Grady does makes me feel like I'm treading on eggshells, anticipating his every move as his visage darkened. Harper, he's a coward, attempting to intimidate you since he is aware that there is no other way to defeat you. But what if he escalates once more?" Harper remarked, "What if it's more than letters or threats the next time? What if he tries to harm the animals or she follows him?" That's her worst dread. Unable to complete the notion, Andrew leaned forward and spoke in a steady, low voice. "Then we'll stop him. We've already told the police about everything, but I believe it's time for us to take further action." Harper furrowed her brows and asked, "What do you mean, expose him?" Andrew responded firmly, "We've discussed Grady's shady business previously, but if we look more closely and bring his conduct into question, we've never had concrete evidence." Harper bit her lip. "So you think we'll find something to light up so we can stop this?" Andrew nodded. "I'm willing to wager that individuals like Grady eventually make mistakes with the concept." Made Harper think that revealing Grady would further damage her reputation. But Andrew was correct. It was no longer an option to allow him to go unchallenged. "Okay," she replied, "let's do it last, but we must be astute about this." Harper and Andrew spent the following few days discreetly collecting data behind the scenes on Grady, and his company struck up a conversation with other shelters and rescue organizations. Stories of strange injuries started to surface from local pet owners and even groups. One evening, sick animals that were sold under false pretenses and funds that appeared to disappear without a trace. Harper discovered a private forum where local animal rescue advocates posted cautions while conducting internet investigation about unethical breeders there. She came across a name she recognized in a lengthy conversation concerning Grady's kennels. One post detailed a litter of puppies that had been sold with serious diseases, while another detailed. Harper's stomach turned over when she learned that a buyer had found the rescued canines they had purchased were actually stolen pets. She waved Andrew to the computer screen and said, "Look at this," as she read Andrew. "There's a pattern here." Andrew looked over the posts, and his jaw dropped. "This is it. We must bring it to the attention of." Harper paused when the local news and police revealed it was us. "We still don't have enough to defeat him entirely." Andrew put a comforting hand on her shoulder before. "Harper, the truth will eventually come to light, so we'll keep searching until we do. Someone must have the courage to unearth it." Harper nodded, his words giving Tucker, who was snuggled up next to him, more confidence. Harper chose to visit the place that weekend after her feet softly barked as though encouraging her. Grady's kennels were said to be on the outskirts of town, so she drove carefully down the gravel road with her hands, clutching the steering wheel as Tucker sat in the passenger seat and quietly observed the outside world. From a distance, Harper could see kennels hidden behind a chain-link fence, partially hidden by overgrown trees. The faint sound came from rows of small homemade enclosures, some of which had shredded tops. When she heard barking dos, her heart bled at the idea of animals under Grady's care. She parked a secure distance away, took out her phone, and utilized the zoom lens to take a few pictures while concentrating on one of the. Then, she saw a man moving and leaving a tiny office building. Holding her breath, Grady Harper crouched lower in her seat and looked about for a minute. She believed he might have seen her, but then he turned and slowly exhaled as he walked back inside. Back at the shelter, Harper showed the pictures to Tucker in a whisper. "Get them out of there, I swear." She continued in a resolute voice. "Andrew and the team, this must be enough to get the authorities to investigate." Andrew looked at the pictures and nodded. "It's a good beginning, but more verifiable proof will be required to prove. Ought to distribute this to the rescue network. Perhaps someone else has information that we could include." Harper agreed, but before responding, she paused when her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number as she took another look at the pictures. Harper chilled her blood as a low, icy voice cracked over the line. "You don't know when to quit, do you?" The voice disregarded her inquiry. "You think you're running cold? You're only making things worse for yourself by assisting those dogs. Leave now, or you'll regret it. The line has gone dead." Harper carefully lowered the phone, her hands trembling, and Andrew moved closer after observing her pale face. "Who is that, Grady?" Were either whispering or one of his people hardening their look. Harper turned to face the shelter where Tucker and the other dogs were kept. "But he's going to the police tonight because he's crossed the line." Lay calmly oblivious to the escalating storm. "We must stop him for them because we cannot allow Andrew to get away with this." When Andrew nodded, "We decided to go together because it was unusually quiet in the shelter." Harper sat at her desk in the evening, the stress from the threatening phone call looming over her like a thundercloud. Her thoughts were racing with worst-case scenarios as she gazed at the pictures she had shot of Grady's kennels. What if Grady fulfilled his threats? What if he attempted to harm the animals or disrupt their shelter? Andrew came in. "You need this," he murmured gently, setting one of the 2 coffee cups on the desk. Harper smiled weakly in front of her, as if you hadn't blinked in an hour. "I just keep." Andrew sat down across from her, thinking, what if we're not doing enough? What if we can't stop him in time? "Harper, you're not alone in this. We're doing plenty and we'll continue to fight until it's over." "All right, the cops are involved. There are pictures, and more people are discussing Grady's operation." Harper nodded. Tucker sensed her fear and patted it over to her, but her uneasiness persisted. He put his head on her lap, and she caressed his silky fur, feeling reassured by his presence. However, he sounded so. Andrew seemed confident, as if he knew something we didn't, and his jaw hardened. Let's keep one step ahead of him. Harper struggled to fall asleep at night, tossing and turning as Grady's warning kept repeating in her head. At midnight, she eventually sat down. Tucker, who had been snuggled up at the foot of the bed, woke up and sighed, muttered, "Let's go for a walk," and gave her a drowsy bark. She put on a jacket and went outside with Tucker St. to enjoy the cool night air. The shelter grounds were quiet and, in silence, lit by the moon's faint radiance. Harper pulled her scarf tighter and she hoped it would work and let Tucker lead her to the edge of the property, where walking always helped her decompress. This time, Tucker's ears pricked up as they passed the storage shed, and he gave out a low growl. Harper muttered, her pulse thumping, "What's it, boy?" Her breath seized as she followed Tucker's eyes and noticed something in the darkness close to the back fence. Harper hailed her as she squinted into the darkness and saw a figure. For a brief while, the figure turned toward her, their face hidden by the darkness, and spoke sharper than she had intended. Tucker stayed Harper before they ran off and vanished into the surrounding woods. She took out her phone and struggled to dial Andrew's number as the dog barked frantically. He picked up someone on the property, and they immediately fled into the woods. "Stay there, I'm on my way," Andrew said. Harper remained motionless as his voice warned her, her eyes darting toward the shadows and her pulse pounding as a scary. Grady wasn't playing a bluff. He was here in a matter of minutes. Then Andrew showed up. With a torch in hand, he questioned, panting, "What happened?" Harper swiftly clarified, pointing to the location where Andrew used a flashlight beam to search the area after she had spotted the intruder, but the individual had long since left. He looked at the fence and paused, scowling at Harper as he pointed gravely to A. She felt sick to her stomach since a piece of the fence had been cut. "Oh my there," Andrew mumbled as he tried to enter. "We need to lock everything down. Double-check the locks and the dogs." After gathering everything, they hurried back to the shelter, where Andrew inspected the outside. Tucker closely followed Harper as she examined each kennel, counting the dogs and making sure all the doors were locked. After what seemed like hours, Andrew eventually let out a low, protective growl. "Returned. Nobody is present at this time, but we must contact the police once more since Harper is testing us." Not only frightened, nodded, her hands trembling a little as she caressed Tucker. Andrew huddled next to her, asking what would happen if we failed the test. "Harper, we're stronger than him and have something that he doesn't care about. Therefore, we won't let her." As promised, the police showed up soon after examining the damaged fence and obtaining Harper's statement. She was greatly shaken by the incident as the officers drove, but they would patrol the area for the next few nights. Harper shook her head as Andrew turned to face her and said, "You should get some sleep." "I can't, and I won't leave the shelter tonight," Andrew stated. Together, they erected temporary cots in the shelter's office. Tucker, as Harper lay there looking at the ceiling, a resolute guardian curled up between them in the darkness. Hardened Grady had underestimated her and attempted to bully her into feeling helpless, but we're going to. In the darkness, she muttered, "Stop him, Andrew." Andrew's answer was calm, but resolute. "We will the following morning, Harper." When she found an envelope attached to the handle of the shelter's front entrance, her heart raced as she ripped it open. "Back off, this isn't over," displaying a terrifying warning scrolled in bold black ink. Harper's face hardened as she clasped the note in her fist, and Tucker barked at her side, sensing her rage. "Andrew." I finished playing after stepping next to her and reading the note over her shoulder. Harper glanced at him, with determination burning in her eyes. "And it's time to take this public. Let's put a stop to this." Harper's note seemed heavier than paper in her fingers as the words replayed in her head. "This isn't over time." After the quiet measures were over, she turned to Andrew and spoke firmly. "We're not giving up," she declared, adding that the public must be aware of his grade and that they must. Andrew nodded to let me know, and I'll engage the press in the pictures weave. Given the proof of this intimidation and negligence, the public will support us, and Grady won't be able to hide. Harper moved quickly after that, reaching out to community leaders and local animal rescue organizations to explain when the rogue kennel incident occurred and pictures of Grady's mistreatment were released, there was an instant outcry, and within hours, Local animal advocacy pages on social media received a deluge of support, started posting information about the atrocities discovered at Grady's farm along with his name. As supporters and volunteers promised their assistance, Harper's phone beeped nonstop the following day as Harper stood in front of. Her hands trembled a little in front of a small group of volunteers and reporters outside the shelter, but Tucker remained by her side. With cameras aimed at her and microphones hovering around, she took a moment to appreciate his serene presence, which gave her strength. Taking a deep breath before I continue, "My name is Harper, and I manage this sanctuary to help vulnerable animals. But what? The last several days have been terrible, and we've learned that there's a man in this village named Grady Walker who operates an unlawful kennel where dogs are housed in appalling conditions. We have personally witnessed the torture, and we have the evidence to support it." Whispers echoed across the audience, but Harper persisted. "This man has threatened us, harmed property, and tried to intimidate our crew in an effort to quiet us. However, I'm here today to declare that we won't give up until his surgery is stopped and all the animals he has injured are safe, is secure. Although these pets are unable to communicate for themselves, we can." The audience cheered, and the reporter started asking, "What evidence do you have?" Harper displayed a folder with pictures of the rescued pets, medical records, and quotes from. "Has he threatened you directly? Witnesses?" Another reporter pressed Harper to confirm. Her voice was adamant. But we wouldn't give up, so Andrew stood by her side. Speaking to the crowd, "We're requesting that community law enforcement and Grady Walker, who has been hiding in the shadows for too long, organizations, animal rights, to intervene and guarantee that justice is done without." After the press briefing, volunteers started distributing flyers with the message that animals should not have to endure this kind of suffering. Neighbors offered to assist secure the illegal kennel as word spread about it from all sides. Rescue organizations spread the word about Grady, and shelter corporations promised donations. Harper sat at her desk at the shelter, taking calls and responding to emails from anyone wishing to. "Harper, you're helping Andrew," who entered with his phone in hand and an excited look on his face. He claimed that a big news station had taken up the story and that Harper's Eyes will be broadcasting tonight. Expanded, which is significant. Perhaps the police will take action if we can garner enough notice. Andrew smiled more quickly, saying that they won't have an option because the pressure will be too great. However, their triumph was short-lived that night as the sun started to set loudly. Harper and Andrew hurried outside after hearing a boom reverberating around the shelter grounds to discover one of the kennel doors was burst out and Grady Harper said in a heartbreaking whisper that 2 dogs were missing. Tucker barked. When he returned, Andrew snarled and clenched his fists as he ran frantically toward the fence line where tire tracks smudged the ground. He snatched the dogs in vengeance, clenching them. Harper's hands trembled as she struggled to control her breathing. "We must get them." Andrew nodded and said, "Call the police again this time. We can't let them win. They will be forced to act." Harper called the emergency number, her voice piercing and pressing as she reported the theft and break-in, and the police came right away, but Grady had already left. "Do you have any evidence that he's—" Harper became enraged, bubbling just below the surface, when the cop questioned HEK, the only person who would do this. On the officer side, "He has intimidated us and attempted to scare us into quiet. Making notes, we'll begin a search, but you should also increase security because he's obviously becoming worse." Harper was sitting on the office steps with her head in her hands when the police left, and Tucker was leaning against her and making a silent. Andrew sat next to her and comforted her, saying quietly, "We'll find them, Harper." With determination burning in her eyes, Harper raised her head and said, "This is it. If the cops can't stop him, we'll find another method." Harper and Andrew made a public appeal the next morning on. The television station picked up the story and ran it on social media, offering a prize for any information regarding the stolen canines. Film taken that afternoon by Harper of the destroyed shelter and the missing dogs. A trembling voice on the other end of the line murmured, "I received an anonymous tip." Harper's heart pounded when he realized where the caller was keeping the pets. "You didn't hear it from me," the voice continued, giving her the address of a dilapidated house located far from town in the middle of the woods. Harper glanced at the phone before hanging up, her veins tingling with adrenaline. Andrew closely observed her. "What is it?" "I know where they are," she added, referring to Grady's. Harper shivered when Hideout Andrew's eyes narrowed, warning her that something might be harmful. Andrew took his keys and said, "I don't care, we have to save them." Then they left. Harper looked down at Tucker and gave him a small smile, saying, "All right, boy, you're coming with." Tucker growled, eager to follow them. Harper held onto the driving wheel as they made their way to Grady's hideout, her determination unwavering. This was Harper's truck, the last stand, thundered down the dirt road into the woods, its headlights cutting through Tucker sat in the rear seat, his eyes and ears alert as dusk approached. Even though he understood how urgent the assignment was, Andrew gripped the door handle tensely. "Are you certain about this place?" Harper nodded resolutely as he requested, looking around them at the shadowy trees. I could hear it in their voice, written across her face, that the call was genuine. "We can no longer wait for the authorities since Grady and those dogs are here." A decaying residence appeared as they got closer to the clearing. The building was encircled by from a distance, they could see the sagging gate of the rusted wire fence. Harper's heart sprang in her chest as she heard a faint barking, and she muttered, "They're here." Harper shook her as Andrew let out a deep exhale and took out his phone. "I'll call the police again and let them know where we are," he said. "Head, there's no time to wait. I'll enter first, examine it, and let you know if Harper is clear. I'll use caution." Cut him off, but before Andrew could continue to dispute with Harper, "Those dogs needed us." Stooped low as she neared the gate, sneaking out of the truck with Tucker just behind her. As she made her way toward the main building, the barking became louder as she passed through the opening and entered the property. Chewy's nose itched as he moved like a shadow at her side, the weight of silence hanging heavily on her shoulders. Followed the aroma Harper gently murmured to him, "Easy, son. Remain close as she." Harper's eyes widened in a makeshift corral with shredded tops as they approached the building's corner, where the two golden retrievers who went missing shaky and crowded against the far corner, their eyes displaying fear, but also acknowledgement when they saw her. Harper's voice broke with relief, them in a whisper, while turning to face the truck where Andrew was waiting. She waved her arm in a brief gesture that Andrew made. Harper gave her the thumbs up before vanishing back into the truck, probably making the police call cautiously. Tucker wagged his head as he spoke to the dogs. "I'm here, and we're going to get you out of this." Harper grabbed for the latch, keeping her tail somewhat still to avoid frightening them anymore, when a voice abruptly cut. Harper froze as Grady Walker emerged from the shadows, asking, "What the hell are you doing through the darkness?" His face was contorted in rage, and his large frame was lit by the dim glimmer of a flickering porch light. Tucker gripped a large metal crowbar in his hand and stepped in front of Harper in a protective manner while growling deep in his throat. Harper stood up tall and yelled, "Let these dogs go, Grady," refusing to back down. "The entire community is aware of what you've been doing, so you can't get away with it." Grady swore. Harper stood her ground, laughing. "You think you're going to stop me? You have no right to be here." Grady's face clouded as her heart raced and the police arrived. "You promised never to harm an animal again." He lifted the crowbar, taking another ominous stride toward me. "I've dealt with guys like you before, so you don't fear me." Harper was startled by Tucker's fierce howl and piercing growl as he rushed forward. As the golden retrievers started barking frantically, Grady staggered back, caught off guard. Together, the sound was so loud that it briefly startled Grady. At that precise moment, Andrew rushed into the scene and yelled, "Harper, the police are here, Red." Grady pivoted, recognizing he was out of range, as blue lights flared in the distance, sirens piercing the tense stalemate. He hurled the crowbar to the ground and ran into the woods, vanishing into the shadows as he did so. Harper wasted no time when coward Andrew yelled after him in a tone of disdain. "Come here, sweethearts," she said as she hurried to the pen and unlatched the gate. Bowing gently and waving their tails slightly as the two retrievers approached carefully, their trust restored as if to reassure them that everything would be all right inside. Harper caressed their matted fur, and Tucker sniffed at them both. Officers jumped out of the police cars with radios crackling and flashlights as the vehicles screeched to a stop. Harper, as they got closer, he pointed to the trees and raced in that direction. Grady Walker, He is in charge of everything. The officers divided up, with some pursuing Grady, while others looked at the pen hand. A senior cop turned to Harper and quietly respected him after checking the dogs. Harper experienced a feeling of relief as she said, "You saved these dogs tonight, and we'll make sure he doesn't hurt anyone else." Turned to face Andrew, who was smiling proudly while holding Tucker's leash. "We did it," she whispered quietly, and Andrew nodded, assuring Harper that they would be transported. The cops carefully loaded the 2 golden retrievers into their patrol cruiser. Harper was given a blanket by an officer, which she wrapped around the shaking dogs to ensure their safety. Harper knelt as the adrenaline started to wear off and murmured, "Are you going home?" She spoke into Tucker's fur and embraced him tightly, saying, "You're a hero, boy." Tucker waved his tail as if he. Andrew put a hand on Harper's shoulder, knowing that he had saved the day. They would now be all right, and Grady. Harper grinned slightly when he was done, the burden of the previous few days leaving her shoulders, allowing her to return to the. When Harper and Andrew later arrived, the shelter was quiet. She remarked, "We have a home waiting for them." Tucker, the rescued puppy who was safely in the back seat that night, sat proudly at Harper's side as though. Harper, aware that he had just witnessed something remarkable, looked at the golden retrievers who had at last. As they stopped in front of the house, she remarked softly, "We're home now," their eyes gentle with gratitude and trust. In the brightly lit shelter, Harper carried blankets and fresh food to cook a meal while Andrew grabbed the leashes. Harper led the 2 dogs into a cozy area inside the shelter. They warily sniffed at the blankets in the corner with the water and comfortable bedding before tucking their tails together. Tucker sat nearby, wagging slightly, his presence soothing and comforting Harper. Muttered, "No," grinning softly while squatting to pet their fur. "You're safe now." Andrew watched the spectacle unfold with awe, saying, "You've gotten away with them." There was no more hurt or anxiety. Harper looked up at him with a mix of happiness and tiredness as he continued, "It's like they know they're finally home." In her opinion, it's not only me. Tucker is also trusted because of what he's been through. Andrew knelt next to her, massaging Tucker's head as if to reassure them that everything would be all right. Adorably, he is a hero and more than just a rescue dog. Suddenly, a car sound enters the silent Harper scowled and exchanged glances with Andrew when the shelter's lot broke. They went outside, where a sleek black sedan had just parked, and they wondered who that might be at this hour. A tall, well-dressed, Harper and Andrew saw the woman emerge, her face displaying a mixture of trepidation and hope. Looked at each other bewilderedly as the woman came closer. "Are you Harper the woman?" Harper nodded and brushed her hair back in response to the question in a quiet yet assured voice. The woman asked, "Can I help you?" with a faint smile and teary eyes as she dug into her purse and took out a picture. "I think these dogs belong to me," she added, displaying the picture for her. Harper was shocked to see the image, which depicted the 2 golden retrievers in good health and happiness. Harper said, "You know them," while playing in a sunny garden. The woman nodded. "My babies, Bailey and Riley, went away weeks ago, and I have been looking for them ever since." Harper's chest constricted in relief, since I never imagined seeing them again after someone stole into my property and took them. "They're here," she replied, her voice cracking, flooded through her. The woman's calmness collapsed as she sobbed and muttered, "Thank you," her voice trembling. Harper led her inside to save them, and Bailey and Riley instantly cheered when they saw their owner. The woman knelt to embrace the golden retrievers as they jumped toward her, their tails waving wildly as they barked joyfully. Harper spoke their names. "They missed you," with tears flowing down her face and a lump starting to develop in her throat. The woman gazed up at Harper, her face full of appreciation. "I don't. You saved me as well as they did, and I'm not sure how I can ever thank you for that." Harper wiped a tear from her own cheek and grinned, saying that all that counts is that they're home. Andrew stood close to his. "Harper, you've given them another chance, and you're smiling proudly with your arms crossed." Taking a business card out of her purse, the woman turned to Harper and said, "I run an organization that aids in the rescue and rehabilitation of mistreated animals," she clarified, adding that we've been searching for individuals like you who prioritize animals above everything else. "If you're interested, I'd love to work with you to expand your shelter." Harper looked in surprise as the woman replied firmly, "Are you serious? Absolutely." Harper glanced to Andrew, who smiled and said, "The world needs more shelters like yours." The woman knelt down and he gave her the thumbs up, saying, "This is exactly what we've been working toward." Before leaving, she wanted to give Bailey and Riley one last embrace. "Thank you again," she murmured, standing there, "for saving their lives." Harper observed her push aside a feeling of calm that was hovering over her as she turned. She sighed heavily as she spoke to Andrew and Tucker, saying, "They're safe, and we made a difference at last." Andrew smiled. "This is just the beginning, Harper." Harper knelt next to Tucker and put her arms around him as shelter was about to change everything. But we couldn't have. Tucker licked her face and his tail. "You are a true hero for having done it without you." Harper gazed back at the screen as she and Andrew closed the shelter that evening, wagging as though he understood every word. Slumbering golden retrievers and the tiny life they had preserved for the refuge had developed into a healing facility for everyone who entered, not just the animals prepared for the. As they locked up Harper, Andrew taunted her about the upcoming task, and she always grinned. Tucker walked with her and barked softly as they made their way home, and Harper knew she had. If this tale resonated with you, she discovered her calling in life: to save people who are unable to save themselves. For more heartwarming stories of compassion, please remember to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Bravery, second chances, and keep in mind that even the smallest act of kindness may make a big difference. See you in the next story life.